Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Truth Wanted. I'm your host, Objectively Dan, and joining me today is truly, and I mean this completely sincerely, my most requested return guest of all time. Absolutely, I get more messages asking for you. Some people who haven't gone back to the episodes and haven't realized you were already on, and like, hey, you should get Shannon Q on. She's really cool. And so I was happy when I found out that you were interested in coming back on, and we're kind of doing a back-to-back thing. You had you on Secular Sexuality yesterday. You were on Atheist Experience.
Well, it kind of was.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, you're around some ACA shows. Yeah, and finally you made your way back to old Truth Wanted. It's Shannon Q, everybody. Shannon, welcome back to Truth Wanted.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love what you do, Dan.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see I have a new camera that I'm using, thanks to Vern for getting that set up for me. And I managed to get the headphones that we use over in the studio. So now I'm not wearing these bulky things on my head. And picture kind of looks nicer. You can see I might need to shave a little bit. But I don't know. I think it's fine. It's Freedom Weekend, folks. So I'm just going to do what I want. Shannon, what are you planning to do on your 4th of July holiday that you celebrate in Canada? Because I know you guys are really into it up there.
It was Canada Day 2 days ago. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of that. No. We celebrated that.
It's not on our calendars. I'll put it to you that way. Yeah.
So no, I don't think I'm going to be doing too much celebrating of freedom. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll change my mind.
Canada, right? That's just not a thing you guys have.
No, we're socialists and communists.
Yeah, totalitarian socialists. Right. State. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the narrative that we're sticking with.
So I've heard.
I'll die on that hill. Not actually. So Shannon Q, obviously, you guys probably know who she is if you're watching the show. But in case you've been living under a rock, Shannon Q has been doing stuff on YouTube for a couple of years now. She's been talking. I would say the focus of your channel, Shannon, is sort of the ins and outs of having conversations with people.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I have. Sorry, Dan, I didn't mean to step on you.
No, go ahead. Like, how would you describe your channel, Shannon?
I essentially have kind of 3 pillars that I look to as goals for my channel, and that's to elevate the discourse, which would mean like having better conversations, looking into better dialectic strategies, having better conversations with people who are, even opposed to your perspective to an extreme level, like modeling better dialogues. Advocating for your own understanding, which means, not taking things at face value, looking into them yourself. If you see the curtain moving, it's because my cat is attempting to just destroy everything around me right now.
Yeah. I had to put Pico. By the way, our cats are in an arranged marriage. I don't know if we ever said that on Twitter, but they are. Pico's in the other room because I set up this camera and he kept playing with the wire. So no Pico tonight, unfortunately. But
maybe that's why Maddie is having such a fit.
Yeah, she knows that
she knows that his betrothed
is on the other line,
being kept from her.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, the last pillar would be to try to be better, not the same, which more goes towards people tend to seek sort of retribution in instances where they feel harmed, and to try to kind of seek the high road. So that's what I do over there.
Yeah.
And hopefully people like it. And I also talk about the intersection between psychology and faith, and do some edited videos, but predominantly it's dialogues with people that I have over there.
Right. And something I wanted to highlight is what's really great about your channel is, you're associated with the atheist community, but anybody I think can watch your channel, doesn't have to be an atheist, and really get something out of it, because your focus is primarily on just the base interactions people have and kind of encountering the deconstruction of ideas, and like how to do that in a way that makes all parties involved, better people by the end of it. Right. Unfortunately, I think the atheist community in particular, not so much recently, but for a while, there was a reputation of, we're just like loudmouth, ready to debate anybody on the spot, ready to take people down. And there's certainly people out there like that, doing that stuff today. And that's not to say that that's always a bad thing, but it is a bad thing sometimes. It's definitely not the best approach sometimes, I think, with some of the topics that we tend to talk about. So I like the idea of, again, elevating the discourse, right? That's kind of what you're all about. It's trying to figure out what's the best way to talk about some of these topics. What are people going through when they're thinking about these topics, and how to best approach that, right?
Yeah, and I've one of the things that I find really interesting is figuring out how two people who look at the same information can come to such differing conclusions. Usually there's a reason for that. And I think finding out and delving into the reasons for that is a really important thing to do. We often seem to think that just throwing facts at people is going to be compelling enough to have them deviate from what they already think. But a lot of people come to their decisions and conclusions for emotional reasons or cultural reasons or social reasons or a conglomeration of a myriad of psychological reasons. And although we like to think that we come to all of our decisions in an entirely rational way, that's not necessarily or always or even often the case, but we don't really do the introspective work to really analyze that and understand how we come to those decisions. And as a result, many of the conversations that people have are just two people kind of shouting facts or what they think are facts at each other.
Which turns out is like the worst way to talk to people most of the time, right?
If your goal is to change the person, your interlocutor's mind, then absolutely. If your goal is to change the mind of people who think like them, the same. If your goal is to have your team cheer about how awesome you are for telling somebody else that they're dumb and people like you are smart, then that's why people seem to like those sound bites, I think.
Sure.
That's not what I'm about.
If you're coming at the conversation with a different value system entirely, like you're just talking past each other. And another thing too, right? It's like, what blows my mind is, I think we like to describe ourselves as like quote unquote rational people, right? Like we sometimes we give the appearance that, hey, we want to be the smart ones in these conversations and stuff, and that's great. But like, if we're interested in science and the best way to do things through science, we should also be interested in the best ways to have conversations, like scientifically, right? Like there's a lot of subjective content that goes into that, but there are some ways that we can measure, like, based on studies in human psychology and sociology, like how approaches to different topics work and like what works better in some circumstances and what doesn't, right?
Yeah, and there's significantly more to intellectual prowess, I think, than simply understanding, being able to rote memorize and regurgitate facts. And one of the things that's really important that a lot of people underestimate is the understanding of how people operate in groups, how people operate in societies, and how that affects everything that pertains to you and everybody around you. People don't seem to put as much intellectual energy into understanding those dynamics as they do into understanding the external world. I think a lot of that has to do, like some of that I think does have to do with this sort of religious incantation that, we have a soul and that what constitutes us exists outside of the physical realm and can't be studied, perhaps. Some people maybe sort of see psychology as not as much of a physical science because you can't actually, pour things into test tubes and see what happens on a consistent basis. It's a little bit more meta than that. You need to be able to conduct a series of analysis and cross-compare things over time in order to get really like robust results through psychology and sociology and a lot of the social sciences. And it's just, I think, a general misunderstanding of how those sciences operate and the importance of them. Like no matter what you do in your life, no matter what you pursue, it's almost 100% of the time going to involve other people. You're going to interact with other people. So it behooves you, especially in any goal that you have, to put some mental effort into understanding how people work, how they think, why you think the way that you do, even if you want to have a selfish perspective, why you think the way that you do is an important thing to analyze. And I'm glad to see more people kind of shifting towards an understanding of that perspective and the importance of that type of work and its general applications. So I appreciate you having me on and giving me the opportunity to.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I mean, you are someone I admire and I look up to, and I'm so glad I'm privileged to be friends with you. I really am.
Oh, Dan, that's very sweet.
Yeah, I'm just grateful to have you on. And obviously, like, again, it's not just me. Lots of people want to talk to you. So we'll get to some calls here in just a little bit. But I like the idea that you point out too about we're always talking to people. Like outside of natural disasters, we're not fighting demons here. It's always people that we're talking to. Now, sometimes people can be monsters, but like at the end of the day, like they are a person with emotions and they have the similar psychological processes, unless extremely abnormal. Most of us go through similar situations and respond in similar ways to similar things. And we can look at that. We can examine that. And I think we can find the best ways to talk about some of these things. Because, one of the questions I get asked a lot, Shannon, is how do I talk to somebody about X, right? How do I talk to somebody about this? And it's like, well, when you go to therapy, right? Like there's multiple different kinds of therapies, right? Like different therapists practice different things. And I think different people who look at this stuff might tell you different ways on how to approach it. But what's going to work best for you is really just going to be depending on your circumstances, really. I mean, there's no one size fit all way to really do this, which is why we really had to be very careful about how we approach it and just make sure that what we're doing is at least based on something, if not, completely out of the blue. Because I think most parenting for the vast majority of human history, for example, they weren't looking at books. Like they just kind of had to figure it out, and sometimes they may not have the best strategies for doing that. Same thing with human conversation, right? We've been having conversations with people since people could talk, but doing it right is really, really hard. And I don't always do it right.
Me either.
Yeah. So it's a process, and we may never be 100% right about it all the time. But there are still better. Some ways are better than others. I do think that's true, right?
Yeah, and what you said about some people are just evil. I think no.
Well, I don't think people are just evil. I do think that
is that like, well, I didn't mean to imply that you think they're just evil, or like that there's some people that, like at this point, at least in time, are demonstrating evil behaviors or evil thought processes.
Sure.
Even in those instances, those people, if you can at least have an understandable trajectory, and it's valuable to learn about that trajectory, so you can prevent future people from following the same or similar trajectory. Like, so even understanding and figuring out the best ways to reason with those people is valuable. And in this day and age, so many people don't understand the power that's in dialectic approaches, that's in an attempt to understand even people that you just vehemently disagree with. Just having a conversation with someone you disagree with sometimes is looked down upon as giving them the opportunity to, proselytize. But that's not necessarily or always the case. If you're able to do it in a nuanced way and you understand the goals of the conversation or the dialogue, you can utilize that as an opportunity to demonstrate this individual's thought processes in a way that puts it up as a mirror to other people who may have had similar thought processes and didn't realize the faulty way that they managed to get there, the harm that pushed them in that direction, and allow them the opportunity to either heal or change that trajectory. So yeah, I just really think that dialogue is a powerful tool that isn't often used because people are so interested in battering each other with who is the most right in a conversation, and aren't as interested in figuring out how we determine who is or isn't right and why people get to wrong decisions.
Yeah, and like you're right. Words are incredibly powerful. Like the dialectical power of people is incredible. I think if I looked back at some of the worst times in my life, some of that's just conversations with people, and some of it's just like the words that they said to me, I can still tell you however many years later, that's still in my head. Now, that may not be exact, human memory is very fallible, but still the interpretation I got from that moment, the stuff that I felt in that moment, that's still something I can remember and recall. And so like the impact you have on people is incredibly important. Sometimes the content of your message doesn't matter as much as the way you're delivering that message. And something I say on here all the time is you can be right about something and you can still be, not the best at presenting it, or
Yeah.
you can be the best at presenting something and be wrong about something. And those are two different things, right? Just because you're right about something doesn't mean you're talking about it in the best way. So there's definitely, like I said, better ways than some other ways. And like, so, you know, since we're talking about it, Shannon, like what are some of your favorite kind of methods to conversations with people? Like if I was to come to you and say, I'm interested in talking to you about, you know, Christianity. I think it's pretty neat. And I think your kid should adopt it, Shannon. Why isn't your kid a Christian? I don't know. What would you say to that?
Okay. One of the first things that I would say is to, as hard as it may be, work on not taking the things that the person is saying to you personally. Now that's going to be contextual. It's going to depend on your pre-existing relationship with the person, the previous conversations. But if it's in a setting like this, for example, where people are calling in, they don't know me from Adam, I work very, very hard to not take it personally, because they're not attempting to make commentary on me. They're attempting to convince me of their perspective. And that it's sometimes different to separate that, because emotions happen to you.
Yes.
You don't get to choose which ones somebody elicits in you.
Right.
So but it's, I think, important advice to at least attempt to work on it, because what tends to escalate these conversations to the point that they can no longer be productive is turning the interactions emotional. And that happens quite frequently. And some people attempt to elicit that because they want to get a response from you, either to get out of the conversation or so that they can, you know, have this sort of, you know, prideful sort of feeling that they got to you. Not allowing people to have that from you, I think, is a really powerful tool. And being able to just push past the attempt to elicit that emotion and get to the core of what they're saying, then the person will start to feel listened to, which is, I think, the second bit of advice.
Yes.
If your goal is to actually kind of understand this person's perspective and be able to effectively communicate yours, you need to be able to listen to what they have to say and really actively attempt to understand it. Even if you don't like it, you need to attempt to understand it so that you can demonstrate to them through dialogue, either through mirroring, or one of the things that I frequently do is I say, okay, if I'm understanding correctly, this is what you're saying. And I get them to just affirm that I understood what they're saying before we can carry on, because that prevents us from talking past each other, because I'm talking about what I thought you were communicating and not what you were actually attempting to communicate. So those, I think, would be two general, I think, important pieces of advice. Easier said than done. Sure. I'm not always perfect at either. I have a temper.
And I think some people also, I get comments that are like, "Oh, Dan, you're so patient and you're so great. Like you can, you know, I could never do what you do." And it's like, no, you can do this. Like, it's not that I'm a monk and I don't experience emotions. It's just like sometimes you just have to put it in a box for a minute and just go at it the best that you can, because if I said the things that I want to say to some people sometimes, I don't think I'd have a show anymore, to be honest. I think I'd be gone a long time ago. But yeah, it's like, you know.
Or it'd be a very different show.
Yeah, it'd be a different show,
different audience.
But I try to remind people it's a skill. Like, it's something you practice and you work on. It's not just something, it's not such something you're born with. It really isn't.
No,
yeah, so those are some great points. If you want to know some more points, you should definitely check out Shannon's channel. And she definitely has some more things to talk about. But I already know people want to talk to you, Shannon, so we'll jump right into calls here, if that's okay with you.
Oh, yeah, there's already calls waiting. Goodness.
Yeah, before we get to calls, I'll do some quick plugs. If you want to become a member of the Truth Wanted YouTube channel, come on and join the channel. It's pretty cool. You get some emoticons for that and stuff. It's a good way to help out the show. Another way to help out the show is to donate on Patreon. And that's patreon.com/truthwanted. We really appreciate all the stuff that goes on there. And also, while we're doing this, there's some merch too as well that you should check out. I know I keep talking about the hoodies and it's July now, but maybe if you're exploring the Nova Scotian wilderness, and
it is like 30 degrees here today. Damn.
Yeah, if you want, well, that's Celsius. Don't confuse my listeners here. We speak Fahrenheit.
Mercan.
In this land. Hey, look, if if you want to show some bears, like, or some moose, like, who sent you? You know, get yourself some Truth Wanted swag. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into some calls.
Awesome.
I would love to talk to the call that I want to talk to just left. Before we can do it. That's okay. I want to go to Craig in California here first, then.
I bet Craig in California.
Let's see. Craig, you're on the air. What's going on? Oh, Craig in California, you are. Oh, and that call is dropped as well. Oh, my goodness.
I bet I know exactly who that was too, Dan.
Man.
But both of you know exactly who.
Okay, we'll go to a different call then. We're also going to go to Ransom in California. Ransom, you are on the air. Truth Wanted, what's going on?
Oh, doing great, Dan. I ain't talked to you in a few months, and I'm stuck in the house for the weekend until the test comes back, so I thought I'd give you a call.
Hey, might as well, right? It's something to do. Thanks for choosing to spend your time with me and Shannon on this awesome July 3rd evening. How can we help you?
Well, I want to propose the hypothesis that we live in a simulation, and I think I have some more evidence and arguments that haven't been presented yet, at least not that I've seen often.
Okay, I have no idea what evidence for a simulation would look like outside of maybe like some breaks in the laws of physics or something. So I guess I'm curious to see what you mean by evidence. And if you do a philosophical argument on me, Ransom, we're going to have a conversation, because philosophical arguments are not evidence, but go ahead.
Oh, no. This one I can league up a little bit for. But first of all, I want to start with Planck time and length. The smallest measurable units of time and length. Now, we see this directly in video game simulations, televisions, that everything out there. The fact that we don't see fluid and we see smallest measurable units in our universe leads me to believe that it would be more likely something that is digital rather than organic.
Okay, why?
Simply because I don't think something that was organic would have a smallest measurable unit.
Why?
Because it's organic, and anytime that we try to replicate organics, anytime we try to replicate something organic with a screen, we do our best to get rid of those fine lines.
Well, we may do our best to get rid of those fine lines, but that doesn't necessarily mean those lines aren't there, right? I mean, like, organic things are still made of like atoms and like subatomic particles, and like you can look at, you know, the individuality of those things. I don't see how that necessarily leads to the conclusion that it's most likely we're in a simulation.
First, that's my first point, is that we have a smallest measurable unit and we see a smallest measurable unit. And I think it was last time that I talked to you, one of the bases is we tend to explain things based on other things we understand.
Sure.
If we have no examples of an area that doesn't have a smallest measurable unit, and we have examples that we have replicated that have smallest measurable units, then what it leads us to is that it is more likely that it's something we know of than something that we would have to make up.
Here's the first thing I see with that, and then I think Shannon has something to say there. I'm not sure, but like, okay, so
I generally do.
Okay, if we're talking about video games, right, that necessarily is in our world. Okay, so like, if we're in a simulation, then that thing is also like part of the simulation. So like, I get what you're saying with that, but like, I think you're almost confusing the map with the territory here, right? Because it's like, maybe we can do that with video games because our world is, you know, measurable and defined. And maybe it's just easier for us to do it when we create video games because, you know, we define those parameters, right? But maybe it's only easy for us to do that when we make video games because that's just how the world is. maybe organic life has just always been this way and we just haven't realized it because now our technology is so developed, we can just kind of, do what we do now. Am I making sense?
Yes, I'd like to touch on that in a little bit in just a second, but I want to hear what Shannon has to say first.
Okay.
All right.
Hi, Ransom. Nice to meet you. So first, I'd just like to ask what exactly it is that you mean by smallest measurable unit.
The Planck time and length are basically theoretical units. I think it's I think the Planck meter, the Planck length is 1 to the negative 43 meters, and Planck time is 1 to the negative 23 seconds. Either that, or I've got the numbers mixed up. But
so you're talking about units of measurable time back to the beginning of the universe, not organic units.
What we can possibly measure in smallest amount of time. What's possible for us to do. Right.
So but that's not our current reality.
No, right? So we can measure things in Planck time. But like it's just like if we had the smallest ruler possible. Like that's basically what it is. Yeah.
Okay. So what you're saying is there's a smallest thing that we can measure. Like we can't perceive anything smaller or conceive of a way to measure anything smaller.
Correct.
Okay. So because we can't perceive of or conceive of a way to measure anything smaller, therefore simulation. You're going to have to get me from one to the other, because the only thing that you seem to have is an allegorical relationship between the fact that there's also units, like smallest measurable units in video games. But it would stand to reason that if, like Dan said, if we're modeling video games out of our perceivable reality, then we would utilize what we've learned from our perceivable reality in order to create that model, and that the inverse wouldn't necessarily be true.
Yeah.
Our universe wouldn't be based on the model we created, which is what your reference point is. It would be the other way around. So essentially you're saying we created something that is a simulation using our perceptual and conceptual abilities. Thus, because we utilized our conceptual and measuring abilities to create something that is analogous to the reality that we experience, the reality that we experience is the same. And you can't get me there aside from an analog. And an analog isn't evidence. You're essentially just saying we created something that reflects reality as we see it, and then saying, thus, our reality is similar to the thing that we created to reflect reality as we see it.
Not necessarily, but close. What I'm saying is that we don't have any examples that counter it. So it seems to me like
what? Us being in a simulation?
I think he means counter the idea that something can't be measured in the smallest possible unit. Right?
Yeah, we have no examples of something that can't be measured below Planck's. So what we have is we have the similarities. We don't have anything that gives us evidence of a difference. So I think it's more time to try to disprove a simulation hypothesis.
Wait. Oh, you went way off the grid. So there are similarities, but there's no evidence of a difference.
Yeah.
Between us and a simulation.
All right, for that one, there is absolutely no evidence of our reality that you can give me that I cannot give you another demonstration of in a digital universe.
How do they generate internal perceptions in a digital universe for the people that exist within the universe?
RNG.
So there is something that it's like to be every being in a digital universe. And they can make independent choices that deviate from the programmer.
You're talking about like inward perception, and I can flat out tell you if I'm walking behind somebody in a video game, there is a dice roll that we see in the programming that determines whether or not I'll be detected based on the scenario. And part of that randomness in the dice roll would be synonymous.
How is that similar to real life?
Because in the same sense, that perception will tell you whether or not you see something, whether it's right in front of you or not. There's times that you
Where's
can
the
miss
agency
thing
of
right
the
in
other
front of you.
perceiver that has the opportunity to perceive you? If it's a dice roll, then you're removing the agency from that person and they no longer have individual perceptions. It's the locus of this analogy is you.
Let's find the internal perception of me or a
Every
because
being every being in existence. How many dice rolls do you think have happened in this conversation in order for me to put this pressure on you?
Oh, you're asking me to count butterflies now. Oh, no, there would be hundreds, if not millions, of rolls every plank to determine everything going on.
How do you make your decisions in the video game? Are they all dice rolls?
The decisions themselves are not dice rolls, but the outcomes are.
So are you the only one with agency?
I'm the only one. Well, okay.
So the entire universe was constructed in order for you to exist?
We'd have to get more specific if it's talking about me having agency. Are we talking about a situation where more than one person can interact within the same digital universe, or are we talking
You're saying
about
that this universe is digital, so you don't get, if your argument is that the universe we're existing in and interacting in now is a simulation, you need to make every argument you make analogous to this situation we're in now, because we are in reality in this universe that you were arguing is a simulation.
Right, exactly. And what I want to know is exactly what type of simulation are you talking about when you're talking about a perspective, because there are going to be two answers, whether I'm playing a first-person game that is an enclosed system, or if I'm playing an MMO that has other people.
But you're not in a game.
You're talking about reality, right?
You're in reality.
Yeah.
The problem is that you're having to make post hoc rationalizations in order to justify your argument being analogous by referring back to the games in order to reconcile the fact that there's dissonance. Because the fact of the matter is that you and I both know that I have agency, as do you. I'm at least aware that I have agency. You and I are having an interaction. This interaction isn't based on dice rolls. It's based on perceptions that I have and perceptions that you have. Unless you can give me a reason to believe that within a simulation, something is going to be able to program individual agency without throwing that system into chaos, I'm not going to be able to buy into your simulation theory as it pertains to the existing reality that we're both in right now. Sorry, Dan, sometimes I talk a lot.
You're good. That's a different way of approaching this conversation. It's very smart. I wasn't even thinking in those terms. I think what I'm thinking of is, yeah, we can make metaphors all day about how what we do is like simulation, because we can simulate anything pretty much. And so just because we can simulate things, though, and again, like it goes back to this idea of missing the trees for the forest, I guess. It's like, I agree with what you're saying, Ransom. I think the observations you make about reality and video games are true to the extent of, yes, they're very similar. And yes, it seems uncanny that we can perform anything in real life that we can in a video game, and really vice versa. But like, you ask us to disprove that we're not in a simulation, and it's like that's not even, I can't even comprehend that, because like we create simulations. That's why they're simulations. Like they are simulations of reality, and reality is like the base there. You know what I mean? So it's like, to go beyond that, like we have to show that there's even another base, because that means that we're simulating something else, and I don't even know what that means. You know, but
No. I wasn't personally saying that I'm here to prove a claim. I'm saying that as a whole, as a society, I think there's been enough of the evidence there. And I wanted to speak on the second topic, would be, what about a frame perfect glitch that caused matter to cease to be matter?
What about it?
Yeah, right. I like that. I like where you're thinking. They're interesting thought experiments. But I don't, a frame perfect glitch that caused matter to no longer.
Listen, Shannon does not play Fortnite, first of all, and I don't.
My son does.
Yeah, I don't. I understand what you're saying. You got to be careful with what the metaphors you're choosing to implement here. I will say that much. But like, I don't know. Are you still there, Ransom? Hello.
I'm still here. I'm listening.
Okay. Okay. So like, what if there's a frame perfect glitch? Like what? What's next? I don't understand.
Well, okay, let me get into this. And okay,
can you make it real quick? Can you do it in the next couple minutes so we can get to the next caller? Yeah.
I speed run games, and part of speed running games is knowing where the physics break so that you can use it to your advantage.
Yeah.
And at the point when you can break physics to work for your advantage, that is the point when I think that we have crossed that line.
And see, that's what I was thinking too, right? Like, that's what I said at the beginning of the call. Like, if we could somehow exploit physics, and maybe not exploit physics because we would still be working with physics, but like do something that would not be explainable by current physical models, that would be something to talk about. That would be really interesting. So I'm with you there. And yeah, I like the speed runs too. I watched that Summoning Salt, man. I like that YouTube channel. He's making some good stuff. But I wish you luck on proving your simulation theories. Like I said, I think
I've got one more sentence.
One more sentence, Ransom. That's all you got. Lay it on me.
Not observed, electrons fired through a double slit will undergo a wave pattern as though they cease to become matter. Now we're going to go straight to the quantum eraser here.
Whoa! That's more than one sentence, Ransom. That's two sentences.
Okay.
That's two sentences. But I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to go ahead and let you go now. But I hear what you're saying, right? You're getting into quantum theory stuff. Like, yeah, there are some interpretations of quantum mechanics that may break everything we know about reality. I'll concede to that much. But I don't know enough about the topic to say anything more than that. You know, and I have to leave it there. I don't know. Maybe if I get a physicist on. But, yeah, what'd you think of that, Shannon? What'd you think?
That was interesting. Yeah. It's an interesting thought exercise. But I felt that way the first time I talked to somebody who not that this is analogous because Ransom seems like he's very clever and very smart. Yeah. But the first time I talked to somebody who believed in a flat earth, I was like, oh, this is silly. And then I realized right away that, oh, this is an interesting thought experiment. Like, how do you prove things? How do you how do you go about figuring out the way to perceive the physical world and how you validate it? And those are good exercises, even though I'm not saying Ransom's analogous to a flat earther, but like having these types of conversations bring me to the realization, oh, okay, well, you do kind of have to like figure out a way to validate your perceptions of the world around you in a way that makes sense as opposed to taking them for granted. So I like, I enjoyed talking to Ransom. It was fun.
Yeah. And like, you know, the simulation stuff comes up every once in a while. I think like, you know, unless you presuppose that we are in a simulation, it's kind of hard to ever figure out if we ever really are in one. Like the simulations I see every day, I can see the computer. I can show you the circuit board. I can show you how it all works. But like, if we're all in a simulation, we can't really do that. Like Neo has that waking up moment in the Matrix, but until we can really have that experience, it's almost kind of null. It almost doesn't, you know, even
some sort of like definitional argument that I think I get into with a lot of like deists and pantheists, where essentially like if you are defining God as the universe, then sure, like you're just essentially saying the perceivable reality is God. But if you're saying that the perceivable reality that we exist in is a simulation, then you're just defining perceivable reality as a simulation. I don't really think that you can get to any hard proof unless, you know, like you said, something glitches or we're able to defy physics. And even if it is the case, like, well, I don't care.
That's tricky too, because I mean, stuff that we thought defied the laws of physics, turns out our laws just weren't written as well, right? Like that's something like the equation. It's the difference between like x minus 1 equals y versus x minus 0.9999 or something, right? It's like they're similar but also different and give different results. I don't know that. It gets complicated really fast, but we have some other calls and I want to get to them. But we also have multiple lines still open too. So if you want to call, we still got a couple lines. If you want to get to talk to Shannon Q and I today, I'm excited for this next one. This is Craig calling in from California. Let's see if we can get you back on, Craig. Hey.
Yeah. What's up, Dan? How are you guys?
Hey, we're doing just fine. I'm glad we got you back on.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. It might have actually been me. I might have hung up instead of, I got nervous. I saw it was Shannon. I freaked out and I panicked.
Yeah. Well, Craig, wait, I got to give a setup. You've been on this show before. You've called into the show before, and now you're back talking to us. So what's up? What's going on?
I've called twice. I called once with Shannon and once with Rachel Oates.
That's right. You only call when Shannon's on, Craig. I see a pattern.
Well, read the memo. Take the memo. Get Shannon calling all the time.
I can't be Shannon.
Try harder, Dan.
Start saying a boot more.
More like Shannon, Dan. That's the read between the lines. Try harder to be more like Shannon in the future. And then I'll call.
Fair enough. Anyway, Craig.
Congratulations, Shannon is now going to be on Atheist Experience. So I'll be calling them too. I was going to call them on Sunday.
Yeah.
And I was in a chat with Jenna from the Atheist Experience, and I really liked her. I found her very Shannon-esque. So
nice.
There you go.
So what do you want to talk to us about today, Craig?
All right. So we can go back to the original. See, what you guys started off with was having better conversations with people who you don't necessarily agree with. And actually, you two are probably the best example. Whenever I have a go-to person I use as an example of people who are really good, it's either Shannon or you or this guy called Pleasure Doubt.
He's buttering us up, Shannon. Be careful. Yeah, this is get ready.
Just get past it, Craig. What do you got?
Wait, what? What was the...
We're just ready for the attack, Craig. We know you're going to launch something on us.
So we feel like you're giving us a false sense of security.
Submarine you. So why you guys eat babies? If you guys eat babies, why all the baby eating? No. Actually, I have a real question about what do you think it is about you two in particular, or anybody who's good at it, that Shannon gave you reasons what she puts into effect, she listens, active listening, things like that. But there's a lot of people who say they're going to do that. The first time I was on an atheist channel, the guy said, "Oh, it's going to be simple. You're going to come on the channel and tell us what you believe and why you believe it." And I was like, "Oh, great, that sounds fun." And I got on the channel and they were trying to jack me the entire time I was there. So what's the difference?
Yeah.
That's a broad question.
I think one thing to consider is our education. Shannon and I we don't have the same field of study, but it's pretty similar. I have a degree in communication. And that's taught me a lot about, communicating with people. Who would have thought, and so I get a lot of it from that experience, I'd say, and having that education. I said earlier that anybody can learn the skills, and that's true, but I will concede that there are certain temperaments that are better suited for it than others. I think that's probably true as well, but that's not to say that people of different temperaments can't use the tools that we, describe in their own conversations.
Well, what I'm kind of asking is, because you can say the tools, what I'm kind of asking is, am I still there?
Yeah, you're here.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. The phone was ringing. You can use the tools, but the other people might say the tools and they might listen to Shannon and go, yeah, I'm going to start doing that. But when they find themselves in a conversation with someone they disagree with, they just do
it's habits. It's habits and it's how we grow up, and it's how we have experienced people from the day we were born. All of this stuff gets into play, and some people have certain things that trigger them more than others. And so it's harder to be objective in certain conversations because of their life experiences. There's a multitude of different explanations, I think, as to why somebody can't.
Right, but okay, so with this particular conversation that you, me, and you guys being the atheists, what do you think? Why do you think you guys are so much better at it than certain type of atheists who you can't really have a normal conversation with them? There are Christians you can't either. Like a Christian is probably trying to win you.
I have an answer to this, but I want Shannon to go, and then I'll give my answer.
Okay, so I think from your perspective, Craig, you would see us as better at it because, you know, we're listening to you and we're interested in interacting with your ideas, and we, you know, we want to hear you out, and we want to actually engage the topics. Now, that is better from your perspective because you feel heard and you feel listened to. Now, not everybody shares that goal, right? Though, like some people, especially in this public realm, their goal isn't necessarily to have, it's not to have dishonest dialogue, or it's just that their goal is to demonstrate flawed thinking. Like that is what their goal is, or that's ostensibly what they want to do. So when they have somebody on, they're not having them on because they have necessarily a legitimate interest in getting to a root understanding of how somebody comes to their beliefs, or having a dialogue on where your beliefs and my beliefs deviate. They're more interested, potentially for myriad reasons that, you know, you would just be speculating on, in utilizing this conversation as an opportunity to use you as an example as to why what you're thinking is flawed, and show their audience somebody like you thinks this way, and this is why I think differently, and like own you, and they use it as an opportunity for that. That's not everybody, but it's, and I'm not even sure who you're talking about, but the message that I'm receiving when you're talking is that you had this as an experience and it kind of soured you, because you also continuously say as atheists as though we're some sort of monolith, and these goals aren't specifically goals that belong to atheists or belong to Christians or belong to Buddhists or belong to Muslims. These are goals and dialectic strategies that belong to people. Like I know Christians that will utilize this as well. Like they'll like, have you ever talked to a preceptor? Holy Jesus! Like there's lots of people who have different and deviating goals. So if it's something that you're sensitive to, or you think that you can't overcome it without getting frustrated in a dialogue, or being comfortable pointing it out, my advice would be maybe do research on people that you're going into dialogues with and see how they've dealt with previous situations to decide whether or not it's something that is something that you're comfortable with and engaging in.
Yeah, I think Shannon summed it up beautifully. The only thing I would add is, like, without getting into free will or whatever, but like, we chose this life. We chose to do our approach this way. And again, not everybody's going to make that choice. And I think some of the reasons why we chose it is because we're cognizant and we recognize some of the problems that you've mentioned. But I also agree to Shannon's point that it isn't just the atheist community. Everybody has these kinds of problems. Yeah, not everybody in the atheist community, by the way, needs to be represented as atheists. But we often are. We're kind of put on the spot for this because we're such a small minority. I remember this conversation I had. I told the story with this Christian Uber driver I had, and he asked me questions, and he straight up said, "Okay, well, you're representing atheism to me right now, so I want to ask you these questions." And I thought, yeah, I guess I am representing atheism to you because I'm probably the only atheist you're going to talk to this month, maybe, whenever, right? So it's like, we're often put in situations more so than the average person to kind of explain ourselves and be held accountable to ourselves,
right? Well, people do
rather
that
than other
Christians
groups
too. Like, if you go to a job and you're the Christian at the job, you get asked like, so.
Maybe in California, in Texas, it's the opposite. But yeah, I agree with you on principle.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, that probably is. Okay, so wait, I definitely heard what Shannon said. I think she's right, that there's a lot of people, atheist and Christian. Like, I wasn't trying to imply that it's all atheists. It's probably about 30 to 40% of the atheists who go into debunk, dismiss, discredit mode. And a Christian like a Darth Dawkins will do a very similar thing where he's just trying to win a conversation or shut down a conversation or, put you in a corner.
Yeah.
And what I was
Craig, you also have to think about, I have things to say.
Yeah.
So you also have to think about the medium that you're utilizing as your point of reference as well.
Yeah.
A lot of people that are going, like the people that you're thinking of are generally probably people that are in the public eye or in the public perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a specific, generally speaking, like this is super general. There tends to be a specific, type or group of types of people that gravitate towards this, like doing YouTube or being like super active on Twitter. They tend to kind of be activists, and they tend to cultivate communities, and they tend to have goals that are based on either alleviating harm or demonstrating thought processes. And they also kind of feel as though they want to be able to utilize every interaction they have in order to help them accomplish that goal, knowing that that's what they're utilizing that platform for. Do all of them have honest intentions? No. Some of them are dicks that just want attention, and they get attention from being jerks to people of faith so that they can high five each other and act like they're smarter than everybody. There's a subset of people that act like that, that hold the moniker of atheists. But there's also people like I guess me, I feel that feels ostentatious, but like me and Dan and like you said, Jenna and Drew, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on, that we have a general interest in more positive activism, where we conduct better conversations and model better conversations and cooperative strategies to kind of better society in general, and be an advocate for atheists who feel as though they're buried under the burden of the bad image that these particular dickheads have thrust upon all of us, because we are a minority, and those guys were the guys that got attention.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm communicating it well, but it kind of frustrates me sometimes when I hear, well, you're one of the good ones, or like, why are you one of the good atheists? And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm one of the ones that you see, but I'm representative of a massive group of people who aren't interested in the activism portion of it and are just walking around living their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to make an analogy here. There are people who talk about Black people, for instance, and are like, oh, you're one of the good ones, because they have this perception that maybe they value the same things, or maybe they have, there's all kinds of reasons, but like that on itself, I think you can recognize that's not cool. That's not a good way to evaluate people as a whole or as a group. And yeah, just because Shannon and I have particular skill sets, and a particular approach to these things, doesn't mean that we need to hold the rest of the atheist community in account to do exactly what we do, because that's not fair. They can make that decision on their own on how they communicate with people, but that, whether or not they do that, that's their own personal ethic. I don't think we're up here saying, hey, everybody needs to do exactly what we're doing, or else you're doing it wrong. That's not exactly what we're going for. I think, I wish some people would adapt some of the strategies that we use, but that doesn't delegitimize, their talking points or the stuff that they believe or don't believe in.
And sometimes a more brash approach is what's needed to knock somebody off kilter enough to really reassess their beliefs, whatever those beliefs may be, whatever that position or ideology may be. Sometimes a strategy like mine and Dan's isn't necessarily going to be effective, because the person is really, really ardent, and the only thing that's going to work for them is to say, "Hey, you're being an idiot right now."
Yeah,
like, because that'll put them in defense mode, and they'll want to prove that they're not like. So, a pile of strategies are required through the entirety of the discourse. And
we're only able to do this now, by the way, because we had a history of people who were speaking out and being out and proud about it, because riot is the language of the unheard. But, now we're living in a time where you see more of us, and hopefully you will see more of us. But again, it's not, the goal isn't to make a bunch of Shannons and Dans. It's to make, our voices heard. Overall, I think
it's to normalize the perception of an atheist as just another human being who has a belief system that deviates from the monolithic view that Christianity is the only acceptable belief if you want to live in a Western society. Otherwise, you're some sort of deviant who shouldn't be accepted.
Yeah, Craig, we went on a tag team there. What do you think?
Oh, Craig, are you still here?
Oh my
I
God.
love you.
Oh man, he's not even on the call anymore.
No, he hang up on us.
I don't know. I don't know when it happened either. I don't know how much he caught of that. But what we're saying, I think, is still really valid. And you know what? I'm glad we got to talk about that, Shannon, because that's something I think about a lot, actually. You know,
me too, because it happens to you probably all the time too, because we're a little bit softer around the edges, I think, than some people are.
Yeah, and that means, oh, well, we can talk to these guys, but those other guys, yeah, they're just not valid. And it's like that's not the case, you know,
because their approach isn't something that I'm comfortable with, and that means that I don't have to listen to what they have to say.
Yeah, exactly.
But here's the thing, though. What we do, if you think we're the good ones and you think other people should model us, then model us, because we listen to brash people.
Yeah.
And try to move past that so that we can listen to what they have to say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if you're thinking other people should model that.
Yeah, I didn't get here in this community because Shannon was there. I got there. Well, because you weren't there yet. But like, you know what I mean? Like there was other, like, yeah, there's awesome, like, you know, obviously Anthony Magnabosco has been influential for me, you know, as an example of someone who might take more of the approach. But like, there's way more other people that aren't like Anthony than are like Anthony. And like, that's important because and there's a reason why they get mad. There's a reason why that brashness is happening. And like, you have to listen to that reason why too, and not just say, oh, I don't have to listen to you because I don't like your tone. You know, that's tone trolling. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything. But anyway, we got more calls. So I want to try to get to the rest of the people here. I want to talk to Doc, who's calling in from Texas. Doc, what's going on?
What's up?
Hey, Dan. Hey, Shannon. This is basically a continuation of what Craig was talking about.
Okay.
So you were just talking about needing different types and needing different approaches to have effective communication with people. So I'm wondering, how do you know what battles to pick, especially online? You talked about you being one of the good ones in online. I feel as a Black person, but often I have to see a lot of problematic things or things that I have issue with, and I'm never quite sure when to get on the battle. My family often tells me that I spend way too much time doing these sorts of things. So I was wondering what your perspectives on it would be.
Well, I just want to point out real quick, the reason why I use that analogy is because there are people who think that, you know, obviously a lot of protests and stuff are going on. They're thinking that my entire life. Like you need to like, you're a good one if you don't speak out, if you go with the status quo, and if you just follow the rules and everything's fine. Like that's what some people think of as a good one, you know, and that speaking out is somehow uncouth or not worthy of people's time. And Shannon and I can assure you, are people who are saying, yes, speaking out and saying these things are worth people's time and it needs to be done. Here are some other ways you can do that. I think I would say that's how we do it. But yeah, picking and choosing your battles is really hard. And I want to talk about a failure I had recently because I think it's important to highlight the goods and the bads. I didn't speak out when I think I should have. I was at a thing about 2 weekends ago, and it wasn't, you know, my place, and it was with some people I didn't know, and there were some people were saying some things about Black people in particular, and one of the things they said was, why can't we call them ends again, you know? And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to say the word on air, but like, you know what I mean. And it was just like, that is awful and disgusting. And in that moment, I wanted to talk to that person and call them out and say, you can't, this is unacceptable. But I felt a lot of pressure. I was at an unfamiliar place and I was with unfamiliar people. And it didn't, you know, I was overwhelmed by all those factors and I didn't want to be a good guest, you know, like all these pressures. And that's a situation I regret. I ended up not speaking out of that. And I ended up walking away from that conversation. But I didn't say anything. And I think about that. And I'm like, that's a conversation where I should have said something. I think I could have done something and said something about it. And that's a subjective judgment, I realize. But like when you see an active wrong and when you see how a belief can harm people or a language can harm people, like, you know, when there's evidence of that, I think that's when you have to speak up. And yeah, sometimes it's awkward and it's uncomfortable and you don't want to do it, but you really have to. You know, it's it's fine and dandy to talk to other people like us who agree with all the same things that we agree with and, you know, get that validation. But we're not going to be making any changes in the world unless we talk to the people that make us uncomfortable, that say things that we don't like and are radically different from how we think. So yeah, just when you see that harm, you know.
I know y'all both have experience with communications and psychology, but how do you know, I know it's a subjective thing, but do you guys have any advice on what battles to pick? Because I know there's the issue with like the backfire effect and making people more set in their position when they hear opposition.
Well, those are two kind of different questions. The backfire effect has a lot more to do with strategy than choosing the battles. So you can get a backfire effect no matter what type of dialogue you're in, depending on the strategy you utilize. And that's entirely contextual. So the hard answer to this question is
what I meant by the backfire effect was that if it's someone who I know is directly opposed from me that I'm choosing to speak out against, it's going to make it more likely for the effect to occur.
It's more likely for the effect to occur, but the likelihood of that effect occurring is directly proportional to the strategy you utilize in a conversation. So I'm deviating here, but I think this is an important point to make because I like talking dialect. So let's say, for example, that you and me have very opposing viewpoints. And you say, yeah, well, X is true. And I come at you and I say, you're a moron. You suck. And I can't believe you said X is true. Don't ever come at me with that nonsense again. Shut up. You don't even deserve to talk. Now, that's scenario one. Scenario two is I come at you saying, okay, I hear you saying X is true. I don't see it that way. Is there a chance that you and I could maybe see why we deviate? Which do you think is going to shut down the conversation right away to the point that the person digs their heels in? The one where they have a visceral emotional reaction to your approach, or the one where they think that you're attempting to hear them? Now that goes back to goals, right? Like the backfire effect is going to deviate. Like no matter what, people are going to fight to retain what they already believe. Everybody is, even me, all of the humans that are all people that have brains, everybody has a bias for their own individual perspective as it currently sits. Recognizing that is a really, really important thing so that you can make sure that you do your best to overcome it. But the first step is recognizing it, but not a lot of people are there, right?
Yeah.
So so that's my little diatribe about the backfire effect. But regarding your pick the battles, it's entirely going to be contextual. So if you're talking about somebody that's in your real life that you see doing damage, if you feel as though you have the bandwidth for it, I would say that you almost have an obligation to at least attempt to do something, to figure out a strategy to approach that person, to at least, find out why and attempt to deter them. If we're talking online and you're just reading through anonymous internet posts all day, every day, you will rapidly run out of bandwidth and you will reach a point of diminishing returns where you're not able to necessarily be an effective human being that lives a productive life. Because there are battles all day, every day at an infinite density of battles that you can fight.
Yeah. That popular post on Twitter, chances are somebody else has already made a great point and that person just isn't listening to that point, right? And that example I gave earlier about that conversation that I regret, I almost guarantee the person that said that thing probably hasn't been called out on that kind of stuff. And if I have a feeling, if I did call him out, that would probably wake him up a little bit because he's so used to saying stuff like that he feels comfortable. And being a fellow white person, he's not going to say that in front of offending parties, right? So, that was an opportunity for me to where I should have said, yeah, this is a chance where I need to speak up because I have the opportunity. I see the immediate harm. And yeah, this guy's going to be a bit rattled by it, and he should, because what he's saying wasn't right. So yeah, real life conversations are almost always going to be better than online conversations. But yeah, you got to pick your battles with that kind of stuff. If you notice, Shannon and I, we talk to people on Twitter and stuff too, but I would also say at least I do it to a very limited capacity because I recognize the futility in it sometimes. And I only try to say things when I think I add to the conversation because, like I said, chances are somebody else has probably already said something great. But if they're not listening, they're not going to listen. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for calling in. Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Great call. Got straight to what you wanted to know. And we had a good conversation about that.
Hey.
So. Yeah,
we did a dialogue.
We did a dialogue. I also have the privilege of being, newer to the atheist community to the extent where I've already seen conversations happen online enough to know where certain paths are going to go and how things work out. And so I can learn from other people's experiences as well as to when something is worth it or when something isn't. Because you can kind of tell with some people, we could give a point by point, but at this point it's almost intuition where it's like you can tell when an honest interlocutor is there just by the way that they talk about the subject, whether they're interested in having a dialogue with you or not. And it's harder to gauge that online to an extent too, unless you know that person's history.
Or unless you're really adept at noticing conversation patterns and strategies that people use over time. But you're not going to know that like at an immediate interaction step. Like you're only going to know that if you see somebody interact over time, because there are people who will utilize a really good, valuable, and important cause to engage in abusive behaviors too. Like there's bad seeds all over the place, and the internet is a very difficult place to traverse. And if you're attempting to cause like real permanent change, I would say the internet is a good testing ground so that you can take the practical skills you use from your successes and failures through interactions there into real life.
Yeah.
Like it's good for that if you want to see it as a learning opportunity. But if you think that you're going to have a Twitter interaction with somebody and they're going to go home and go, I really rethought everything about my life.
Something on Twitter today. I grew and developed it. Nobody has ever said I've grown and developed my character because of Twitter. It's not a thing. Twitter is not real life. Just so
I cry more and I got a harder skin.
If anything, Twitter has made our lives worse. I think that's true. All right, let's go ahead and go to another caller here. Rick from California. That's a couple different calls from California tonight. Rick, you're on the air. What's going on?
Hey, what's up, Dan? Hi, Shannon. How you guys doing?
Hi.
Doing great.
I'm hot.
You guys doing all right? Hey, so pretty much the reason why I called was because me and my cousin have we've been debating a lot about like the Bible and about our beliefs growing up. I've kind of recently turned to agnostic. I feel more comfortable in that category. But the one main thing that when I was going through all this, questioning everything, was when I started reading the Bible. I started in Genesis, of course.
I'll do it.
I mean, really, I didn't have to go far to say like, whoa, there's a lot of bad stuff in here. It's a lot of stuff that's I'm questioning and everything with. You guys know the conversations with slavery and killing. Anyway, but just the most interesting thing about Exodus 35 verse 2, it says you should kill somebody working on the Sunday, or it doesn't say should, regardless of what it says. It's saying that this is what you should do if somebody works on a Sunday. But chapters before, Exodus 20 verse 13, I confront to my cousin when we talk about this, and he's the one that wants to talk to me about this stuff. But when I tell him, I said, that's so weird to me how God says thou shalt not kill in Exodus 20:13, but then just chapters later, pretty much saying that if you're going to kill, this is the way to do it. Like that's how I view it. If I view that as a huge contradiction and a huge error in the Bible. That's just a huge error because I don't believe God would ever allow that. Period.
So I'm going to give you a hot tip, Rick. I don't think that's the best example you could use, and here's why. I think somebody who is really studied on this stuff is going to tell you, no, that commandment doesn't say thou shalt not kill. It says, "Thou shalt not murder," and murder is defined
in the new translation.
Right. Well, defining. I'm telling you this because this is what other people have told me. Right. Like, this isn't something I personally believe, but they will say that murder is defined as an unlawful killing. So as long as that killing is lawful, you're good. And if you're following God's law and you're doing it within the correct parameters, totally okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
So how do you deal with that?
I have a way to deal with that.
Go for it. Shannon has an idea.
If you want to appeal to Bible passages, I would I'd go to Numbers. I think it's 22. Test for the unfaithful wife. That one is one where God actively aborts a baby if the woman is
correct.
Yeah. So there, this is one of the ones like you, Rick. I read the Bible. And that's the passage I got to when I was still a Christian and just threw the book on the ground and was like, God damn it. God damn it. So the test for the unfaithful wife, if you leave and you think your wife is cheating on you, you can take her back to the tabernacle. The priest will take some dirt off the floor and put it in with holy water and say an incantation over it. And then the woman drinks it. If she was unfaithful and got pregnant as a result, then she'll miscarry. And if she was faithful, then she gets to keep the baby. So in my perspective, that was God committing an abortion. Now, some people brought it up saying that, it was her leg to rot. So she didn't, that based on that interpretation, God didn't commit an abortion. But here's the thing. It also said that she will be completely infertile for all her days. Now, if you are pregnant with a baby and are suddenly rendered infertile from that moment till the rest of your days, like, what happens to the baby? Right? The only that essentially means that you can thwart God's plan. And also, like, sorry, Dan, I can sense you're going in. You go. We both have a billion.
Okay, so we can go on Bible rants all day, but I feel like, Rick, you had some more stuff you wanted to say. But here's a greater point here. Because I'm trying to arm you with things people will say. Here's another thing. Okay, so like we got to remember when it comes to the killing on the Sunday thing, that's respecting the Sabbath. Remember, Jesus broke the Sabbath, right? He performed a miracle on the Sabbath, and when he was confronted on that, he said, "Was the Sabbath not made for man, or man made for the Sabbath?" So his whole point, like even Jesus doesn't care about the Sabbath, right? Christianity doesn't always cross with Judaism because it's like Christianity is Jesus's take on Judaism. Like it's not even consistent within itself. So like you got to be careful with this stuff. But another thing, point I was trying to get to this as well was Christians will also say, well, that's the old covenant and the old covenant doesn't apply anymore. This is called covenant theology. And that by Jesus dying on the cross, and this is what I was taught growing up, and doing the whole thing, those old rules we don't have to follow anymore because Jesus' sacrifice was the fulfillment of those rules. Now, it does beg the question, well, what rules do we follow now? And that's going to depend on which Christian you ask. But these are some examples.
That's honestly like one of my biggest, I don't want to say I don't like church because I understand the positive magnitude that it can bring to somebody. So I'm not that person where I'm against it. I'll still go, but that's my biggest thing about church. Like they'll have an example like it's I don't understand how they're gonna pick and choose from the Bible what they want to preach. Like, for example, the Bible says not to eat shellfish, but then they're gonna say you can go ahead and do that because
New Covenant.
Whatever, it's the Old Testament. But then you ask them, why can't have, right? And if you ask them, hey, can I have tattoos? They're going to point into the Old Testament and point out you can't have tattoos because it says here. But then if I ask them, are you still eating shellfish or shrimp? They're going to, most of the time, most people that I would talk to would say, yes, I do.
Cafeteria Christianity.
Well, then how do you, God, like, are you nervous about me getting tattoos and you eating shellfish? Like, if that's a checklist in God's, the book of life, if one of those is a checklist, aren't you nervous about not checking that off, like, as a good thing? But I guess that's one of my biggest arguments where I just
and again, they'll just straight up say those laws don't matter. I mean, that's just something you just got to be ready for. So, it's good to know that, because the Old Testament stuff, I feel like it's easier to argue because you can just find a verse that's like atrocious and it's just, and point that out, right? New Testament stuff, it gets a little bit trickier because you're working with different epistles and you're also working with the Gospels and stuff. So yeah, it gets a bit trickier. But at the end of the day, remember, any kind of weird inconsistency you find, there's always going to be a rationalization for it, and you just kind of have to suss that out. And so it's good to know all the arguments,
right?
Yeah, exactly. There's always going to be an apologetics for everything, and I mean everything you encounter in the Bible. So it's good to know what those apologetics are, so you can see how bunk they are, because it's some level of bunk usually, not all the time, but most of the time.
I have a fun one for the New Testament.
Yeah.
If somebody refers to the New Testament, you can ask them why, if they're all individual attestations of the personal witness of the risen of Jesus throughout his life, why is Matthew almost 80% Mark? And if Matthew was written by Matthew, why does the story of Matthew's deconversion differ in the story of Matthew?
And see, you're assuming that people have read the Bible, and that's what gets fun. I didn't know that. I didn't know that until an atheist told me that, and I was a Christian for like years. And it was like, oh, yeah. I mean, I've read the Gospels, but I wasn't doing cross-examination between the different accounts. Like, I didn't understand. But one thing I wanted to talk about, the tattoo thing. Yeah. I have a fun story about that, because I talked about that with somebody before, and they gave a defense I had never heard in my life, which was, well, God says your body's a temple. And what do we do with temples? Well, we decorate them. And so my tattoos
I knew you were going there.
I was like, I guess. All right, I guess. Can you graffiti the temple too? Like, does anything count? Like, I don't know.
Isn't there a scripture in there where it says that there's? Isn't there a scripture where it says that God has like a tattoo of us on his hand or something like that? I'm I can't
in Revelation. Yeah, so in Revelation, it's talking about Jesus, and Jesus has like these crazy looking tattoos on him and stuff. And also we're supposed to have tattoos on our foreheads if we're the mark of the beast and stuff. Like it's all crazy. But Revelation is so far from regular Christianity that even regular Christians will tell you, like, yeah, I don't know what the heck's going on there. Like, that's kind of wild. So there's one of them. I believe Revelation 13:1, where I talked to somebody about it, and it says, I don't know exactly, but this is the way it went. Paraphrasing again, it said that there's going to be a beast, and he's going to speak like a dragon, and I'm like, what? This doesn't sound. Yes,
it's godly. This sounds so evil.
Dragons,
like kind of like black magic.
If you
are to their dinosaurs.
There is a chapter of lost extra parts of the book of Daniel in which Daniel talks to a dragon. That's the story.
Right.
The dragon. It's like, yeah, that was and I guess they decided, I don't know why they threw that part out. Maybe because it wasn't in all the stories. I think that's the reason why, or also maybe because there's no dragons. But if you look at even early Christian fathers, and I'm trying to remember which one specifically. I believe it was, which one was it? I can't remember, but one of them talks about a belief he has in like phoenixes, which is interesting, not because of the Bible, but because of a story he heard one time. And he writes about how the phoenix is a metaphor for God because X, Y, and Z, I guess because the phoenix rises, and just like how Jesus rises. Like he's writing about this metaphor, but with the assumption that phoenixes are actual real birds you can find in the world. So yeah, like the Christian authors, they didn't have any better perspective of the world than we did. If not, they were worse at it. So like they're not authorities on my life in any particular.
Have you read any of the non-canonical gospel? Well, he's mentioned the infancy gospel is crazy. Which one is the one where Jesus literally carries around a talking cross, like a flaming talking cross?
I don't know about him carrying it around.
Is that Peter?
There is one where a cross talks to Peter.
Yeah, it's Peter. It's Peter then.
Yes.
Yeah, like there's like a talking.
That was stuff that didn't make the Bible? Or?
Yeah, so here's the interesting thing, Rick. The first question you're going to ask is, how did they determine the books of the Bible?
I did a whole stream on that with a New Testament scholar.
And guess what? We don't really know. We don't know. If at best it was democracy, like they voted on it. Human beings voted on what they thought was legit.
Based on their personal theological perspective.
And it's like God's word shouldn't be based on democracy. Like, that's like, I feel like God should be like, no, that's the one. But like, that's not how it happened.
Yeah, I had a New Testament scholar on. His name was Ian Mills, and he was really, really interesting. And we talked about canon formation. And he's a Christian. He's a super cool guy. And he was literally like, every church had a different set of scrolls. Some of them we don't even have anymore. Some of what went into canon had like almost everything to do with the individual theological perspective of the constitution of the church at the time. There was probably some politics, and that it is what it is. So you should read all of it, including the non-canonical stuff, because it all gives you a holistic perspective. And there's even different Bibles that do and don't have different books.
Oh yeah.
Not everyone has the same number of books.
Yeah, that's the thing I talk about with people too. When they say, "Oh, have you read the Bible?" I can literally be like, "Which one?"
It's not even about translation. It's about the number of books.
Yeah, like
canon.
Different ones. And people don't even, that blows people's minds. If you want to blow a Christian's mind, tell them there's multiple different Bibles. And they'll be like, what? Like, they don't know. But yeah.
No, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, Catholics and Protestants do not use the same Bible. No. They do. You go to a Catholic church.
I know Catholics don't. Yeah.
But Eastern Orthodox does not use the same Bible. The Coptic Church does not use the same Bible.
Oh my God! Put a KJV onlyist in front of an NIV.
Yeah.
And just watch the two of them argue, and you'll be an atheist. Yeah.
Christianity's been broken since day one. That's the point we're trying to make here. Also, like, you can see that in modern history too. Like, look at David Koresh. David Koresh was an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventists, and that was already an offshoot of another thing. Like, it never ends. Christianity is an offshoot of Judaism. And I try to make that point too, and that people don't comprehend that. They're like, oh yeah, Mormonism is based off Christianity. Guess what? Christianity's not first either. And guess what? Judaism, you can go back to that too. There's some roots there that aren't monotheistic. So yeah.
Yeah, Akkadian, Sumerian.
Yeah, it's turtles all the way down. So anyway.
I was really interested, if you guys don't mind me asking a quick question. Can I ask what denomination of like, if it was Christianity or religion you guys came out of?
Oh, sure. I was an Anglican.
Yeah.
Oh, what?
Anglican, which is like Catholic light.
Oh.
It's like, yeah.
Except Catholics are idolaters. So there's that.
Right. Yeah. I grew up kind of a mix. Actually, I grew up in the Methodist church. And then I think my parents decided it was too liberal. And so I went to a Baptist church. Yeah. And I mean, it was not all Methodist churches are liberal. First of all, I want to break that right there. We would not be having this conversation about gay marriage in the Methodist church if that was true. But also, yeah, I spent my teenage years in the Baptist church. And so that's where I grew up, around a lot of the evangelical tradition and stuff. But I still kind of thought like a Methodist. I can't say at any particular time, because my beliefs were definitely not in one box or another. I think they kind of were different at different times. But yeah, those are my two main influences.
Oh yeah, I always like to ask that question because I grew up Pentecostal, like where the women have to wear skirts below their knees.
Yeah, see, we thought you guys were here.
All that stuff.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's what the Baptists really don't like the Pentecostals. They don't like any denominations, but the Pentecostals in particular, they don't like. I think it's just the showmanship. I think they get a little jealous.
And the Mennonites think that you're all assholes.
Yeah. And the atheists, it's all bad. Anyway.
When I was questioning real quick, when I was questioning everything, I actually called Kent Hovind on the phone one time. Because his number, his number's on his, And I actually called him one time, and I asked him what denomination he is, and I believe he told me Baptist or it was some sort of Baptist. And he asked me what I am. I told him I'm Pentecostal, And this is when the whole scripture of God is not the author of confusion kicked in for me, where I'm like, wait, well, when he told me the reason why I should probably leave the Pentecostal church, he related it to Cain and Abel, and how Cain brought a beautiful offering, and and then Abel brought the lamb. And he compared it to Pentecostals as saying, you're doing too much for your religion. You're bringing God too much. See, and that's when I was like, wow, see, I grew up so opposite. I grew up like, no, you girls, I mean, I'm not a girl, but I'm saying like they would look at the women, and if their skirt's above their knees, it's complete, it's just harassment.
Yeah.
Almost like you got to put your skirt below, you got to do this. And that's when the whole thing finally just started shaking my head, like, because I never looked at it that way. I never looked at it as like we're doing too much for God. I thought it wasn't enough.
See, that's a great example. We were talking about this earlier of using a metaphor, but the metaphors aren't evidence. That's just a metaphor. You know, like he didn't actually explain to you demonstrable reasons why his interpretation was better than yours. I'm assuming just based on what you told me. Sounds like he just gave you a metaphor of why you're wrong, which isn't a good way to talk to people or argue your case. But yeah, lots of problems. Right. It's bad all day. We could talk about all the different stuff. We got one more call that showed in at the very end that I want to get to. So I'm going to go ahead and get to them real quick. Rick, thanks for calling in. That was a great conversation. Hey. I loved every minute of that. Sorry, I had to hit drop before he had the last thing to say, but that was fun. I got a lot out there. But we got one more call that just popped in. So I want to get to him real quick, and then we'll wrap up the show. Dragnauct? What's going on?
Hello.
Oh, this is gonna be trouble.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm rage quitting. Rage quitting.
What's going on? So I figured oh no, I got something that you'll like, Shannon. So I wanted to call in to discuss a scenario between my cousin and I, and this is a story that I don't tell too often. So basically, back when I was in high school, my cousin and I both experienced the same exact event at the same time. We were in a car. We were at a stop sign and a stoplight, excuse me. And then we were progressing through the intersection, and a car nearly hits us. If you ask us both about that event, we will give two different accounts for it. My cousin will say, God intervened and saved us from being hit by a car. I will say that, well, I know you're driving and you're not quick on the pedal when you're taking off. That's what saves us. So how do you account for something like that when in relation to instances of divine intervention?
Oh, it's a case of confirmation bias almost 100% of the time.
Yeah. Here's an easy one. How do you demonstrate that God did something and it wasn't just natural forces? Can you? That's a claim, you know? Can you test that? Can you tell the difference? And if you can't, then there's no way of knowing that's true.
Does your cousin give you consistent pushback? Like, are they constantly saying, like, no, I know that it was divine intervention, that it couldn't have, that if all other circumstances being the same, God stopped my foot from hitting the pedal?
Well, he's not a strong theist. He is willing to see reason, and so he actually acknowledged exactly what I had said. So, you know what? Yes, my driving skill definitely played into it, but just based on how he personally interpreted it is that he can't disabuse himself of a supernatural aspect to that, because in his eyes, I am rejecting an integral part of reality.
Huh. I would ask, like, my first response would be, is it possible that, do car accidents happen with no divine intervention whatsoever? And if so, how do you know that yours was a car accident that had divine intervention? And I would just go from there, because if there's a world where that exists, but it's not with every single case, it's one thing if he says yes, and it happens with every single case. That's a different strain of thought. I don't think he would go there. I'm assuming he'd say, yes, it happens sometimes, happens others. Then you just got to figure out the criteria why. And if he says he just felt it, well, I don't know. Would you accept that answer if, a Muslim said that he felt that Allah helped him out would you accept that answer if a Scientologist said it was because of his, I don't know what they call the soul things, whatever, like there's, yeah, like how are feelings a reliable way of knowing things? And if so, how does this help you come to that conclusion? I would just take it as piecemeal as you can, but yeah, go ahead, Shannon.
I also think that when you experience something that's jarring, it's very, very easy to take the mundane components of that experience and imbue them with a spiritual attribute, if that's the lens through which you already view the world.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're already viewing the world as God has some sort of integral, or intrinsic portion of your life, like he's interacting with it and he's intervening with things on your behalf, then the fact that happened, like arbitrary though it may be, that you didn't end up getting severely injured, that the mundane activities that led to that scenario taking place exactly as it did seem to be amplified mentally, because that it could have happened differently. Like you're acutely aware, like it's brought to your acute awareness. And when you are brought to acute awareness, especially matters of life and death or grave physical harm, your emotions activate within you. Like your cortisol levels spike, your amygdala fires up, and you start to have all kinds of like adrenaline and epinephrine flowing through you. And those flow not just through your body to activate your muscles, but also through the rational components of your brain. And if you already have a scaffolding that's built into your like if you have a mental schematic essentially that's saying that the way I view the world is that God is an active part of life and he does miracles, you would potentially have a really strong emotional and psychological connection to that experience that it immediately was cemented with the perspective of, like I had a visceral experience. That visceral experience had an emotional impact that I didn't readily recognize. This could have gone an alternative route. And I already believe that God intervenes in my life. Thus, this is essentially a demonstration of his intervening, even though ultimately they're all mundane things. They just seem to you to be extraordinary.
Yeah, I don't even know why I said use like the Muslim example or whatever. You were there too. Like, and you didn't come to that conclusion.
Right.
I would ask him, why do you think I didn't come to that conclusion and you did? Maybe is it because of your upbringing? Is it because you have to have a belief system already in place in order to come to that conclusion? Because you didn't come to Jesus. Like that's, so yeah, it's interesting, but we do have to wrap things up for tonight. So Dragnauct, thank you for calling in, and hopefully we got a good answer to your question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
You're problematic.
Oh, you got the dig on him right when I was hitting drop too.
Nailed it.
Didn't even fight back.
Timing was God intervening.
That's dirty. That's dirty. Well, if you still want to talk to us and you still have something you want to say, you can find us on Discord. We're going to go to the Discord after show for just a little bit. And you get a chance to talk to me and Shannon for the next 15, 20 minutes or so. We'll see how it goes. But click on the link for that. Until next time, though, for those of you who are listening at home, Shannon, where can people find you at?
I have a channel called Shannon Q because I'm very creative. Hey, look, there's the card. That's it. Like those places, all of those places. I'm on Twitter at Shan with 2 N's _ Q0. And I'm also on Facebook. It's Shannon Q _tube on Facebook if you'd like to find me there. And yeah, hopefully you check it out. Oh, and I'll be on Talk Heathen this Sunday. And probably on the Atheist Experience.
Just going everywhere. Just a world traveler. All from the comfort of your own home.
Just turn on your computer and type Shannon Q into any browser.
Yeah.
I'll pop up.
Yeah. And if you want to find me, I'm on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan. You can also email the show. It's truth@atheist-community.org. And we talked about donating on Patreon. That's really helpful. Again, we got merch. We got the YouTube membership stuff. That's all really, really cool. And we have a Facebook group as well. It's Truth Wanted on Facebook, which I approve members on there for, and see people post on there sometimes. And so, yeah, interesting conversations do happen on there as well. Last but never least, I have to give a huge shout out and thanks to the crew that helps make this show happen every single week. Look at those guys. Yeah, everything is better when you know you've got a crew helping you out. Vern's rocking the merch, which you should definitely be interested in. I have like my original Truth Wanted hat is really cool because it's the one that's not in stores, but it's like too small for my head, so I don't really wear it. But I keep it as like a souvenir. You know, it's like it's the one thing that I have for. What were you gonna say? You want to take my hat? Is that what you're saying?
No, I thought it was adorable. I would take your hat now just to spite you because you're being a jerk. I thought it was adorable that you kept it as because you have such a ginormous mutant head, you had to keep it. You had to put it on a shelf so that you could bury it separately from its purpose.
All right, so I'm getting ad hominem attacked right now. Yeah. Shannon, lovely as always. Thanks so much for being on the show. Thanks for watching another great episode of Truth Wanted, guys. I'll be back next week, but until next time, remember to always keep wanting the truth. See you later.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?
No, you're done.